I received the tip in an encrypted email. It was late, and the newsroom was quiet except for the hum of computers. Newly declassified FBI files on MLK, the message read, followed by a link. My pulse quickened. Could this be the key to understanding the shadowy tactics used against one of America's greatest leaders? The next morning, I sat with the files spread across my desk. There were memos, surveillance logs, and transcripts, all stamped with the ominous, top secret. I felt a mix of curiosity and unease as I began reading about CNTL-PRO, the FBI's covert program to disrupt civil rights organizations. One memo from 1963 stood out. It called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the most dangerous Negro in America. The words were written by J. Edgar Hoover himself. Dangerous. I thought of the man who had delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech, who advocated for peace and equality. Dangerous only to those clinging to power. The files revealed that the FBI sought permission to wiretap King in 1963, just after the March on Washington. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy reluctantly signed off, citing concerns about alleged communist ties. The justification was thin, the intent was clear. Hoover wanted dirt on King. The logs detailed how agents installed listening devices in King's hotel rooms during his travels. I pictured the agents sneaking into rooms, hiding microphones in lamps and behind furniture. It felt invasive even to imagine, let alone read about. I paused at the infamous suicide letter. Written in 1964, it was a cruel, anonymous note sent to King, urging him to take his own life. Accompanying the letter was a recording purportedly capturing King in compromising situations. The FBI hoped to push him over the edge. My stomach turned. The recordings were often referenced in the files with salacious detail, but no context. Was it gossip or fact? I reminded myself that the goal wasn't truth, it was to discredit King and fracture the movement. The more I read, the more I saw the FBI's obsession. The surveillance logs mapped King's every move: Selma, Montgomery, Birmingham. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. They weren't just monitoring his public actions but his private moments as well. I wondered if he ever felt truly alone. I dove deeper into CNTL-PRO. It wasn't just King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and even students were targets. The FBI saw the civil rights movement as a threat to the status quo, and Hoover wielded his agency like a weapon. The files repeatedly linked King to suspected communists. The names of advisors and associates appeared, often flagged as subversive. But there was no hard evidence, just a smear campaign cloaked in national security concerns. I reread King's speech from the March on Washington, juxtaposing it with the FBI's internal memos. While millions celebrated his vision of equality, the FBI doubled down on their surveillance, convinced he was a threat to order. The files referenced King's wife, Coretta, with chilling casualness. Her phone calls were monitored, her movements tracked. I imagined her reading that anonymous letter, the strain it must have put on their marriage. Yet, she stood by him, unyielding. The FBI didn't stop at King. They infiltrated the SCLC, planting informants and sowing distrust. I wondered how King managed to lead when his own circle was compromised. Memos detailed attempts to leak damaging information to the press. Many journalists refused to publish the FBI's material, recognizing it for what it was: character assassination. But not all resisted, and some stories made their way into print. The files noted the Selma marches with disdain, framing them as disruptive. I read about how the FBI monitored the planning, even as state troopers brutally attacked marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Despite everything, King kept going. The files hinted at his awareness of the surveillance, but he refused to let it deter him. His speeches grew bolder, his calls for justice louder. King's opposition to the Vietnam War marked a turning point. President Lyndon B. Johnson, once an ally, distanced himself. The FBI seized the moment, intensifying their efforts to isolate King. By 1968, King was organizing the Poor People's Campaign, broadening his focus to economic justice. The files revealed the FBI's alarm. This wasn't just about race anymore, it was about challenging systemic inequality. The sanitation workers' strike in Memphis brought King to Tennessee in April 1968. The FBI surveillance followed him there. Their notes described his speeches and meetings, but always with an undercurrent of disdain. The files abruptly stopped at April 4, 1968. King was assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. I sat back, the weight of the moment sinking in. The FBI surveillance couldn't prevent his death, nor could it erase his legacy. The files included reactions from FBI agents, some coldly clinical, others almost celebratory. It was a stark contrast to the grief that swept the nation. Riots erupted, and the civil rights movement lost its most prominent voice. The FBI's role in surveilling King became public in the years after his death. Revelations about COINTELPRO shocked the nation, exposing the government's attempts to undermine its own citizens. I reflected on how the tactics used against King set a precedent for modern surveillance. From activists to journalists, the shadow of COINTELPRO lingers. I traveled to Atlanta, visiting the King Center. Walking through the exhibits, I saw the man beyond the files, a leader, a father, a flawed but extraordinary human being. Coretta Scott King became a voice for her husband's legacy, condemning the FBI's actions and continuing his work. Her resilience inspired me as much as his speeches. I interviewed historians about the FBI files. They emphasized the context of the Cold War, Hoover's paranoia, and the lengths to which the government would go to maintain control. I visited communities King fought for, speaking with elders who remembered him. They didn't care about the scandals. To them, he was a hero. Was it fair to scrutinize King's flaws through the FBI's lens? I struggled with the ethical dilemma. No one is perfect, but does imperfection negate greatness? Back in the newsroom, I began drafting my article. The FBI waged a war on Martin Luther King Jr., but in doing so, they revealed their own moral bankruptcy, I wrote. As I filed the story, I thought of King's words, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Despite the FBI's efforts, his vision endured. That, I realized, was the ultimate victory.